What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing my spoiler-free review, the official formal spoiler-free review for Godzilla Minus One, Gojira Minus One. I'm excited, man. Konnichiwa minasan, D-Man desu. Thank you all for tuning into my videos. I want to give a huge shout out to my Japanese viewers. My channel is currently almost at 70% Japanese viewers. Oh my gosh, thank you for tuning in. I want to give a huge shout out to my friend Dai-chan Movie Room. If you don't know Dai-chan, please go check him out. I've got him linked down below. One of my favorite Godzilla YouTubers, actually one of the only ones I watch. I have a pretty high standard for Godzilla YouTubers I check out, and he's definitely one of them. So I want to give a huge thank you to Dai-chan, because Dai-chan, you're the reason that I was able to do this in the first place. I'm gonna perpetuate the rumor you guys made up. Now, I flew to Japan just to watch a movie. I definitely didn't do anything else while there. I wasn't there for personal reasons and to hang out with people. No, I flew there to watch one movie. That's what happened, according to you, and so that's now canon. That's a canon event. I flew to Japan just to watch a movie and then I flew home, but I wouldn't have been able to watch that movie had it not been for Dai-chan Movie Room. So I want to give a huge thank you to Dai-chan's Movie Room. Thank you so much, man. He is the one who helped me secure my IMAX tickets for the very first screening of Godzilla Minus One as it opened up on November 3rd, and without him I literally would not have been able to watch the movie that morning. I would have still been able to see the movie that day, but I would have missed out on the showing that I wanted to go to. That was the one I wanted to go to. Also, oh my gosh, this is the first Godzilla movie we've covered entirely in this room. This is the first Godzilla movie from start to finish, and my coverage has happened in here. That's pretty exciting. But yes, I wanted to give a huge thank you to Dai-chan Movie Room, because without him I would not have been able to see this movie for the opening screening. It was at 9 in the morning in IMAX on November 3rd, 2023 at the Toho Cinemas Shinjuku, which is where the premiere for the film was held. And it's also the Godzilla Hotel, which happens to be where I was staying. So big thank you, man. I really appreciate it. As I understand it, it's a little different in Japan. There's no Thursday night showings for movies, and it's not like the late night showings is the big showings like it is here in America. Apparently the morning showings are the ones that all the otakus go to, so that's the one I went to. That's one I wanted to go to. Either way, I was obviously the first Godzilla movie I've seen in Japan, which was a wonderful experience, and I'm so freaking glad I got to have it. Made the whole trip worth it, because apparently that was the only thing I went there for, is what I've been told. The theater experience was very crazy. My friend Matt from Monstrosities, go check him out as well. Please go support him. He was there with me. We got up early. We met down at the theater entrance before the theater even opened so that we could get our pre-film items, because of course they do the theater exclusives that go on sale that morning. So we were there to get those. There was a big line that formed in front of the theater, significantly larger than we thought it would be, and so we got in there with the morning rush. I saw quite a few friendly faces there, actually, like people I have known, I've met at G-Fest, or that I've met other places. That was really cool. But I got some fun theater exclusives, and that was great stuff. After that, my friend and I went to see Godzilla Minus One for the opening IMAX screening, and it was so much fun. The pre-film ads were strange in Japan, I just want to mention, because they're not as annoying or pretentious as the US-based pre-film ads. I hate when you're watching a movie at AMC and you get an ad for AMC. It's really annoying, and I'm sure that a lot of Japanese people feel the same when you're seeing a movie at the Toho Cinemas and you get an ad for the Toho Cinemas. But they were like calm and nice and friendly and welcoming, and they weren't kind of talking down to the audience like I feel the ones in America do, nor were they aggressive and loud and shouting like I'm doing now. Like, it was weird. It was a weird experience to be like, oh, these are actually kind of welcoming. There was also a little featurette that played with Gareth Edwards and director Takashi Yamazaki talking before the movie that I just broke down in one of my previous videos, so go check that out. And then the movie began, and it was a brisk and beautiful 2 hours. It really didn't feel the runtime at all. I felt like this movie was very well balanced. The second viewing of this movie was in MX4D, and it was an absolute blast. It went by much faster than the first viewing. And I want to shout out this old man who saw the movie next to us, because there was this old man who saw the movie in the theater. It was an old Japanese man, and I have no idea what exactly he was saying during the movie, but Japanese theaters are so quiet and polite during the films. But this old man was like genuinely taken off guard so many times during the movie that he would just utter these one-word phrases or these little things that would come out of his mouth. It was just like, what kind of profound wisdom is this man dropping in the middle of the movie as his whole world is changed around him, because he clearly was not ready for that MX-40. There was also a point when our seats were like throwing us around and it launched his cane. He looks at my friend and he's like, is that yours? No, man, that's your cane. It was so much fun. It was like a great time. I just want to mention that because it was such a good time. Although I do want to say it is actually pretty hard to invest in a movie in MX-40 because you're constantly being reminded you're seeing a movie movie, although it was a super fun thrill ride and it was a great experience and I'm super glad I did it. I could get a lot more into that, like how when the movie ended the first time for that 9 a.m. showing, many people in the theater were literally weeping when the movie ended. There was a woman who broke down on the stairs trying to leave the theater. She just couldn't stop crying. There was people kind of curled up in corners crying when the movie ended. I was almost crying multiple times during the movie. It's an emotional movie, very effective, good stuff, man. But I want to get into the actual spoiler-free review here, and I will say the term spoilers has been wildly perverted when it comes to Minus One. There aren't many spoilers to be had in this movie. A lot of people are getting like very strangely defensive over spoilers all of the sudden, as if people weren't desperate for spoilers and leaks before the movie came out. But now they're getting defensive over things like the color of Godzilla's atomic breath, which isn't a spoiler, so I don't quite understand what exactly the spoiler culture around Minus One has become lately, but I do want to mention that. Getting into the review itself, I want to say I feel generally the same way about Godzilla Minus One as I feel about the Godzilla Minus One design, and that's that it doesn't really do too much new at all. This movie is not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not trying to innovate. Rather, it is trying to buckle down, focus on the best aspects of this particular type of Godzilla story, and make it as well refined and crafted as possible. And in my opinion, that's why Minus One walks out being a much more well-polished, well-made movie than pretty much any Godzilla movie we've seen up to this point. And for that reason and that reason alone, I thought the film was great. While it doesn't innovate, I actually thought it does a lot of things better than we have seen them done before. And I really appreciated that about the movie. Nothing in this movie really blew my mind. I was not shocked by almost anything this movie did, although I did feel vindicated a couple times and was like, oh yeah, I got that prediction right. There were other times when my predictions were wildly off basis and I was actually happier for it. I thought that was a better direction to go in than what I thought they were doing. So I do want to say that this movie is not like the kind of movie where my jaw was dropping like, oh my god, I can't believe they did that. But it was a movie where as I was watching, I was like, they're really pulling off what they're going for here. Everything they're shooting for, they're nailing, and I appreciated that so much. If I had to say what is Godzilla Minus One, if I was to compare it to other Godzilla movies, I've been bouncing back a lot in whether I think the movie is more like Godzilla 1954 or Godzilla 2014, and it depends on kind of what I'm thinking at the moment. So if I was to just give a set of movies that this film is like, I would say it's similar to Godzilla 1954, Godzilla 2014, and Godzilla Raids Again. You take those three Godzilla films, you throw them in a blender, you chew it all up and spit it out into a really well-refined, polished version of what that would become, and this is it. And I really appreciated it. But if I was to say there's one movie out there in existence that this film is the most like, it would be Jaws. And not in the way that people say Godzilla 2014 is like Jaws, because people say 2014 is like Jaws, but when they say that, they're just saying that basically Godzilla's not on screen a lot. And that's not at all what I feel about Minus One, because Godzilla shows up about as much as he needs to. He shows up consistently, frequently throughout the movie. There's not like more than like a 40-minute gap where you're sitting there going, oh my god, Shin Godzilla, wake up. There's not that. That's not happening in this movie. Godzilla shows up when he needs to, and it feels really nice when he does. They just treat Godzilla differently, you know? And as I've said on Twitter, this film feels like Jaws, not in the way it shows restraint, but in the way it goes for it. It's not like Jaws in that they hold back on Godzilla so that you're like, oh, don't show the shark because it's scarier. This movie knows that Godzilla's fucking scary. You're gonna see him, so it shows him. What this movie does that is so much like Jaws is the way it does its characterization, the human aspects, the way it goes at, the way it also goes for the horrific elements of Godzilla. This guy is scarier than he's ever been before, and I loved it. It was good stuff, man, and that's what this movie does, similar to Jaws. It goes for it, and there's a lot of little Jaws references, like the buoys, the shots of the buoys, or the way they try and defeat Godzilla. It's very Jaws-esque at times, and I loved that as well. What does Godzilla Minus One do right? I think it does almost everything right. I actually have very little critiques about the movie, and I'm very curious to see if this is going to change when I watch the movie with subtitles, because it could. Maybe I watch it with subtitles and I'm like, these guys suck. I hate these characters. I don't like the plot at all. That would amaze me because it was a very easy movie to follow, but I'm just going to preface it by saying that. What I will say is that this movie is incredible with the visual storytelling. I have watched many a Godzilla movie without subtitles before. If you are like me and you order the 4Ks from Japan, then you've seen a couple Godzilla movies without subtitles. Shin Godzilla is an absolute slog to watch without subtitles. It's really difficult to get through because if you don't understand what's being said in that movie, it's hard to care about anything going on in that movie until Godzilla's just knocking stuff down, at which point I could just watch those scenes only. A movie like Godzilla 1954, Gojira works decently well without subtitles because it is fairly visual, but it's slower than I would say Minus One is at times. And so at times it kind of drags, and specifically in the first half, if you can't follow the plot, it's a little slow. And I mostly know that because I watched Godzilla. I watched Luigi Cozzi's Godzilla without subtitles, and I was like, okay, at times this movie's straining. There are other Godzilla movies, like if you've watched Godzilla vs. Hedorah without subtitles, that movie's boring even with subtitles. Same with like Godzilla vs. Megalon. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of fans for those movies. I like them too. I'm just saying, without subtitles, there are Godzilla movies that don't hold up, and this is one that does. I would say if you watched Godzilla 2014 without being able to understand it either, as I've watched that movie in Japanese, it can also be pretty difficult to engage in. Whereas Godzilla Minus One, I was engaged the whole time. I never felt like I needed the subtitles, literally at all. There were multiple times when I forgot that I didn't understand what the characters were talking about. And I would also like to say, I have eyes. I can watch a movie. I've watched silent movies. I have a film degree. I've studied cinema. I've watched many foreign films, sometimes without subtitles. This is not my first rodeo watching a movie without subtitles. I've got a lot of people asking me over the past couple weeks, how do you even understand the movie? Or how do you even watch a movie without subtitles? Like, you barely even saw it. No, I saw the whole thing, and I understood a lot of it. This is not my first time watching foreign films, nor is it my first time watching like a silent film, if you want to say. It's a visual movie, and the visual storytelling was incredibly strong, and I want to give a huge shout out to director Takashi Yamazaki for that, because he absolutely nailed what he was going for in that regard. Another thing that I really loved, without even needing the subtitles, I loved the characters. There were a few characters in particular who I was a really big fan of. In particular, Akiko, the little girl, was so freaking cute. I really loved her, and I was really rooting for them to protect her. She was great. She's a really great emotional hook for our characters, for Shikishima and Oishi and Ota. She's great. She's a great central core for this movie to pivot around. I also loved the buddy dynamic between Mizushima, Shikishima, Noda, and Akitsu. And actually, Noda and Akitsu were the two standouts in the movie. I thought those two were phenomenal. I really enjoyed those two characters. They're a lot of fun. I like whenever they were able to crack jokes, and I like some of the silly things that Noda does throughout the movie. And I also appreciated that Noda's not treated like this science nerd. He's actually in on the action and is competent and isn't like cowering away. I feel like that's a very typical archetype for the science nerd character, and he just wasn't that. He was actually involved and down to get dirty in the field to fight Godzilla, and I loved it. So big shout out to the characters, because I thought they really worked, and I thought the friendship between the core four was really strong. And then there was also the relationship between Shikishima, Ota, and Oishi, and I thought that was a pretty strong dynamic as well, specifically obviously with the relationship between Shikishima and Oishi. That's the relationship that I think is going to be brought to life through the subtitles the most. That relationship is the one that's going to benefit the most from the subtitles. As far as the setting goes, I thought the setting was absolutely amazing. They nailed the era, they nailed the locations. I really liked that they were shooting on location in this movie. It really helped elevate this film, and that's something I'll talk about in a second. But the locations we visit in this film I thought were really strong, whether it be Ginza or an island in the South Pacific or Shikishima's village. It was really strong stuff. And that leads into the production design, which I thought was on another level in Godzilla Minus One. It's absolutely fantastic in the way it recreates the period and the grittiness and the dirtiness of it. It's a really tough time for Japanese people, and I loved that every character was covered in soot and dirt and nasty grime, including the baby at the start of the movie. It was good stuff. And I know period pieces are always gonna look beautiful, but this is a especially well executed one. In a world where Oppenheimer and Barbie are both films with incredible production design, I want to give a shout out to Godzilla Minus One, because not only did it have the task of recreating the era the way that Oppenheimer did, for instance, but Oppenheimer benefited from going to real places, real locations that still exist. Godzilla Minus One goes to places that don't exist in that form anymore. I went to Ginza, I went to Hibiya. These places look literally nothing like what they look like in Godzilla Minus One, and yet Godzilla Minus One has these astonishing recreations of 1940s Ginza and Hibiya that look so accurate to the real-life historical documents and pictures of those locations. It is truthfully jaw-dropping. Even though at times, sometimes you can tell that you're looking at a digital city, it never really impacted my viewing of the movie the way that it did in, say, Shin Godzilla or Shin Ultraman. It really stood out as being very well done and well handled. This is a movie that balances its budget better than probably any other movie I've seen. It looks so much better than Shin Godzilla, although it has double the budget of Shin Godzilla, and actually I thought it looked on par, if not better, than modern Hollywood. I'd say Minus One does not go as special effects heavy as a film like Godzilla vs. Kong, and it benefits for it. It doesn't go as special effects heavy, and that's why the special effects that are there look really solid. It's also why there's not as much of them as something like Godzilla vs. Kong, because it just simply doesn't have the budget to have, like, let's say, King Kong walking screen around for 90% of that movie. Shout out to Godzilla vs. Kong's VFX. I think they're fantastic as well. It's just some of the environments don't look as good as this movie. That's a result of them having to do more. So I'm not saying it's comparing apples to apples here. I just wanted to throw that out there. The cinematography I thought was really gorgeous in this movie. The camera movements are not as inventive as something like Shin Godzilla, and they're not as stylish as something like Godzilla vs. Kong, which has some truly awesome, weird camera work. Shout out to that team for doing that. Godzilla Minus One is simply just a movie that knows how to shoot pretty visuals, and it does that very well. So I wanted to shout out Godzilla Minus One for having the most aesthetically pleasing Godzilla film ever made. Big shout outs there. Even though the cinematography is not as, let's say, magnificent as something like Kong Skull Island, it's really good stuff, and I want to shout out the artistry at work there. The on-location filming really elevated this movie so much more than most Hollywood pictures that are currently being made, and showed why going to locations is still so valuable, same way that Kong Skull Island does. It adds this sense of realism and beauty and real scale to the film, and I started out noticing this in the very first scene of the movie when we picked up in the South Pacific on this gorgeous island that just felt real. It felt real, and it was good stuff. And no wonder they shot it on location. This has been missing from movies for a while, especially in the United States, and so I really appreciated it here. And then when you go to, let's say, a CG recreated Ginza, most of the time you don't notice because it's so freaking well handled. The sound design is also incredible. I thought it was on a higher level than any of the other Godzilla movies we've seen in a while. It was really good stuff. I really liked the sound design in Godzilla vs. Kong, and Shin Godzilla, I appreciated the stylization of it. But this movie, it's not going for style, it's going for substance, and it really executes that super well. It was a very scary movie, and it knew how to use its sound to create good fear and tension. This was also aided greatly by the amazing soundtrack in this movie. This film features some amazing music, and if I had to say what is the soundtrack for Godzilla Minus One, this isn't really a comparison I've heard anybody make, but it truly feels like if you take Halloween Kills and Oppenheimer and just poof, nuclear fuse those two together, sprinkle some Ifukube in there, and that's what you've got here, because this movie has some beautiful music that sounds like it was pulled straight out of Oppenheimer. And then like one scene later, you're hearing these horrific, tense sounds that put you on edge and make you uncomfortable and cringe, and that's the point. And it's all brought to life through this wonderfully ominous soundtrack. Then you've got songs like Divine, which just go for this scale and power and immensity and inevitability of Godzilla, and it's really well handled. And then all of a sudden they hit you with this Ifukube stuff, and the Ifukube in this movie I think is better used than Ifukube has been for a while. Ifukube's music I think got a little played out when people only started using Godzilla's March, and this is something I mentioned recently. Godzilla's March I think is fantastic, but to me Godzilla's March is either used when Godzilla's getting his ass kicked or should be used when Godzilla is kicking ass for humanity. I don't think Godzilla's March should be the song when Godzilla's, let's say, destroying a city. Doesn't really work as well. Shin Godzilla kind of skirted around that by using the Terror of Mechagodzilla variant, which is a little more scary and ominous for some reason, even though that's a heroic theme. But sometimes Godzilla movies just kind of use Godzilla's March when he's doing a destruction scene, and this has been happening since the 80s. And it's good stuff because it's Godzilla and it's the DNA of Godzilla and it feels like Godzilla, but it could be more powerful had they used different Ifukube music, like Godzilla's Rampage theme. And this movie knows that, and while it doesn't use my preference in Godzilla Rampage themes, the one that I think has been sorely missing from Godzilla for a very long time and really needs a comeback, what it does do is it gives us some incredible revamps of Godzilla's true destruction themes as Ifukube intended them. And then the Godzilla March is used while Godzilla's on screen, but it's used as a march for the military as it was always intended to be. That is wonderful stuff, and that really made me hyped when I heard it, and I'm so glad that they remembered that's what that song was for. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to all of that because I thought it was incredible. Then we get to the thing that really works for me, and that's Godzilla, his characterization, his screen presence, all of it. I loved Godzilla as a sea monster. I love that this movie made Godzilla more of a sea monster than we have ever seen before. I loved the stuff we got to see with Godzilla in the ocean, and I loved how Godzilla wasn't just overpowered the way he is in Godzilla vs. Kong, where there's no stakes, none of it matters. Literally nothing in the aircraft carrier sequence matters because Godzilla's gonna be fine. So who cares? The only thing that's tense about that sequence is Kong, and if Kong's gonna be okay. That's where the tension comes from. The tension does not come from if they're gonna be able to successfully repel Godzilla, nor does it come from if Kong's going to be able to defeat Godzilla. But in Godzilla Minus One, you get the sense that they probably could kill Godzilla if they tried hard enough. And that raises the stakes because now when Godzilla's attacking a ship, he can't just cut straight through it. He's just not strong enough. He really has to stand on the thing and tear it into pieces. And it has way more weight and tension, and you're able to build out the sequence in a much more satisfying way. I also love how much effort Godzilla puts into things. There's one scene in particular when Godzilla's trying to knock down this building and it's just not going his way, so he says, screw it, and just tail swipes the whole thing. That is such a wonderful moment. That's like a big cheer moment for me personally because it finally shows Godzilla putting effort into something. Godzilla's a guy who rarely puts effort into his destruction. The Monsterverse knows how to show a Godzilla putting effort into things, but only really when he's trying to fight another monster. When Godzilla's doing a destruction in either the Monsterverse or anything else, he's just kind of sleepwalking through it, especially in Toho's films. Godzilla sleepwalks through his destruction in Toho's films a lot lately. And this is a Godzilla who's not sleepy. He's going for it. I also love a Godzilla who is scary, and this is the scariest Godzilla we have ever seen. I freaking loved that about it. It was great. He's unsettling and unnatural and creepy, and it was so much fun. I also loved the way they treated Godzilla with weight and emotion because it made Godzilla feel truly wonderful when he was on screen. Like, you could kind of understand what the guy was feeling, and that is something that is really important. It's the same reason that I really like some of the Monsterverse stuff with Godzilla. I really prefer in like Godzilla King of the Monsters when you can get inside of Godzilla's head and kind of tell what he's feeling through his actions alone. That's good stuff. I also love a Godzilla who, as I said, isn't invincible because it raises the stakes and makes things way more intense, and it causes more suspense as you really feel like they have a shot, and having a shot is way more entertaining than not having a shot. Finally, the most important thing about this movie is the hope. This movie is not a hopeless movie, and it is not a movie that just sulks. This is a movie that shows that we can have hope even in the face of disaster, and as we heard in a recent interview, the point of Godzilla Minus One was to show how humans come together and overcome even in the worst of times. And that's what I really appreciated about Godzilla Minus One, is that it was a movie that could have its darkness and its horror, but also give us glimpses of hope in a time when I think the world needs it more desperately than we have in a long time. The world needs hope right now, and I'm glad that Godzilla Minus One can have a sad ending, can have an emotional, resonant ending, but doesn't leave us on a hopeless note. I really appreciated that. What doesn't work about Minus One? For me, not really anything. I really don't have anything that didn't work, but I will say Godzilla Minus One is a movie that simply checked the boxes I was hoping for, while not going too much further. The movie never blew me away, it never astounded me, it never shocked me with what it was doing in terms of surprises. While the things it did well enough to blow me away on its execution of those, didn't blow me away in the regard of like, wow, I never saw that coming, or like, oh my god, I've always wanted to see that but never knew it until now. It did what I wanted it to do but didn't go too much further. So while I enjoyed it, and I'm currently enjoying it more than I'm enjoying any of the other modern Godzilla films, especially because the more some Godzilla films sit with me, the more issues I have with them. That will definitely happen with Minus One as well. I just want to say, as of right now, I am enjoying it more than I'm enjoying a lot of the other Godzilla movies out there. I do think that they could have gone further with some things. I would have loved to go further with some of the destruction sequences. Specifically towards the end of the movie, I think they should have gone further with the finale. I also think that they could have gone further with the politics, but I appreciated their reasoning for why they didn't, and I liked the way they kind of very cleverly skirted around some real world controversies by playing it very safe. That's a thing that I think Minus One does well, is play things safe in a very clever and smart way. How about the fans? Well, I think the fans are gonna be totally split on this movie. I think you're gonna see a lot of fans saying that this is the best Godzilla movie ever made, and saying that this is what Godzilla truly should be, and this is gonna be the pinnacle of Godzilla. For a lot of other fans, I think things like Godzilla's screen time, the way that Godzilla's used in the second half of this movie, the finale of the film, and maybe some of the other elements are gonna weigh heavily on some fans and make it so that they don't love it, but that's okay because you've got Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, which is gonna be one of the dumber Godzilla movies ever made, that's gonna deliver on the monster versus monster action battles that a lot of fans really like, and I like that stuff too, and so that's gonna be able to satisfy both ends of the fandom, I think. Then I have a friend who saw this movie who had some complaints about melodrama or originality, and again, for originality, for me, I thought this movie did things better than other Godzilla movies have, and so that's why I gave it the originality pass, but as far as melodrama goes, To my friend, if he ever sees this, all Godzilla movies are melodramas. In 1954, that's the movie that everybody says is the best Godzilla movie ever made. We literally jump cut to Emiko crying at one point because we needed it to just suddenly be emotional. Like, she needed to have a bigger emotional reaction than she was having in the shot before, and so it jump cuts to her crying. Or how about the ending when Sarah's always like putting his hands on his head and rubbing his head and putting his head on the desk? I love Godzilla 1954. I think it's a masterpiece, but even I'm willing to admit that it's melodramatic. And that's just to say that I think melodramas work really well. Star Wars is a melodrama. Empire Strikes Back, that is like classic melodrama right there. And Minus One is a classically melodramatic type of movie, and I liked it. That's the kind of stuff I enjoy, though. Godzilla vs. Kong is a melodrama. They all follow the tropes of melodrama. So anyways, to my friend, I don't know, every Godzilla movie is melodramatic. Where do I sit with Godzilla Minus One at the moment? Well, it's hard to rate the movie. I can't rate the movie until I see the dialogue with subtitles, so I'm not going to give it a rating right now. But I will say, I enjoyed my first watch of Godzilla Minus One more than I enjoyed my first watch through of Godzilla Singular Point, or the anime trilogy, or Godzilla vs. Kong. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as my first watch of something like Godzilla King of the Monsters, and definitely not Kong Skull Island or Godzilla 2014. I don't know if any experience will match either of those films for me because they were like such the peak of my fandom and just my excitement in life. So I don't know if I'll ever get a movie that peaks Godzilla 2014 in terms of the hype, or a movie that peaks my enjoyment as much as Kong Skull Island. But as far as enjoyment of Minus One goes, I think the best comparison I can make is that while I didn't enjoy it as much as my first watch of Shin Godzilla, I am enjoying it more than my current watches of Shin Godzilla. The way I watch Shin Godzilla now and the way I watched Minus One now, I liked Minus One a lot more than I am currently enjoying Shin Godzilla. I think it has better pacing, more interesting characters, and a better use of Godzilla. And ultimately, that's the comparison that I think is most deserved, is to its Japanese predecessor Shin Godzilla. Even though they're wildly different movies, they have enough similarities to where I don't think they're apples to apples, but I do think it's like an apple to a very similar fruit. I don't know. I think you can compare those two more easily than you compare other Godzilla movies. So that's what I would say. I'm enjoying Minus One now more than I'm currently enjoying Shin Godzilla, although my first watch of Shin Godzilla got me more excited than my first watch of Minus One. There's that. Thank you for sitting with me through my big ramble here. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more big rambles like this and you want to hear me talk about Godzilla Minus One more, well then please stick around. If you want to support the channel, you can use the link in the description below where you can go check out the Patreon. I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. I really appreciate the support I get over on the Patreon. It really helps me out, helps me make sure I can keep making videos like this for you guys. Through the Patreon, you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. And if you like this type of content, then please make sure to stick around, subscribe, go check out Daichan Movie Room, go check out Monstrosities, and go check out Godzilla Minus One when it comes out. I think a lot of people are going to really love it. I think it truly will be a lot of people's favorite Godzilla movie ever made. And for those of you who it's not, don't freak out too much because I think Godzilla x Kong the New Empire is going to have you covered. So you're going to be satisfied in a couple months anyways. That's what I'll say about that. All right, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man out.